In this episode of Conversations Over Coffee, we're going to ask, if God is all loving and all powerful, then why does evil exist? Grab your coffee, let's go. If you're new here at the channel, firstly, thanks so much for stopping by with Conversations Over Coffee. Really what we seek to do is just kind of answer the conversations that you might come up over a cup of coffee, and we try to give you a really bite-sized answer to kind of keep that conversation going. And as I said, we're going to explore this question today. If God is so good, then why is there suffering in the world? And I'm actually going to release a couple of videos on this. We'll kind of check these out over the next coming weeks, because the reality is it is a really complex and detailed question. So I want to take the time to have a really good conversation about this. And so what I want to do in this first video is really just kind of give you an overview and really explore a couple of the ways that you might be able to answer this question. And the first thing to sort of note is that there's two really broad ways that we can kind of come at this question and come at this challenge. And the first way is the intellectual problem, because when it comes to suffering, the question we have to ask is, what is the challenge intellectually? Is it possible that God could exist as well as suffering, or is it not possible intellectually? And then the second side of the corner, the second way to address it is, well, how do I feel about suffering in the world? And those are two very, very different questions with two very, very different answers, because and I'm sure you've experienced it, I've experienced it in my life, that despite the fact that I believe that logically God and suffering can exist, that when something happens to you personally, when a family member gets sick or when you get sick yourself, you kind of ask that question like, well, why is this happening? And a lot of the time you logically know, hey, these two, suffering and God, can both exist. But it's an emotional question, because in that moment, you're like, well, I'm really feeling the tension of having to live in the middle of this. And so the first thing to notice is there's a logical way to answer this question, and then there's an emotional approach, and there's kind of two different avenues that we can attack this question through. Now, when it comes to the intellectual problem, there's a number of ways, and a lot of different people have proposed or discussed ways of thinking in which they can answer this question. Throughout this video series, I kind of only want to look at two. I want to look at the logical version and the evidential version. We're going to look at those in coming videos. And really, the logical version seeks to address the question, well, if suffering exists, therefore it's not possible that God exists. And really, the evidential version of the argument seeks to kind of talk to the ground. Well, because of all the suffering in the world, it's improbable that God exists. So in a coming video, I want to look at that logical challenge, which is, well, any suffering existing means it's not possible that God exists, or the other version of the argument, which is the evidential version of the argument, which says that it's improbable based on all the suffering in the world that God does exist. Like I said, the other way to look at this is, which is kind of what I want to look at today in the few minutes that we have, is the emotional problem of suffering, and how do we seek to answer that from an emotional standpoint. And I think actually Jesus has a whole lot to offer us, and I think it's the best offering. I think Jesus is the best person to actually offer us something on this. And the reason I say that is because regardless of the way you look at the world, regardless of your belief system, regardless of your worldview, regardless of your religion, you still have to answer the question, why does suffering exist? Okay, just because you're an atheist doesn't get you off the hook. You still have to kind of present a reason for why suffering exists. If you're a Hindu or a Muslim or a Buddhist, or if you're a New Age person, whatever your worldview, the way you look at the world, you still have to give a reason for why suffering exists. In Christianity, or the teachings of Jesus doesn't stay separate from the world. Jesus actually came into the world. In fact, the author of a document in the New Testament actually says that he who knew no sin became sin, so that we, humanity, may experience the righteousness of God. Which is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it, that in the Christian worldview, Jesus actually suffered and entered into history with the purpose to suffer in order to restore humanity's relationship to God. So that when we go through suffering in our own times, that we would know that the God that we follow isn't living separate to us, isn't living distant or disconnected from us, but when we suffer, that the God who we follow actually suffered as well, and actually did that in order to establish a relationship with us. Now, I hope you really found that helpful, and I know in a couple of minute video I can't begin to plumb the depths of a question like this, so here's what I'd love to do. If you're watching this, I'd love to invite you this Sunday at 8:30 a.m. and 6 p.m. over on our Facebook, on our YouTube channel, and it's on Facebook as well. Because I'm going to be answering the question in a Beyond at Home episode called Why Is There Suffering? And if you're watching this later, then you can just go over to our YouTube channel. You can click back into the channel and you can search for that video. Why is there suffering? Or why does God allow suffering? And I'm going to spend 20 minutes or 15, 20 minutes talking about this very idea. I think you'll find it really, really helpful. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in for Conversations Over Coffee. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. It would mean the world to us if you hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you next week for another conversation over coffee.